He was the soothing voice that changed the Doobie Brothers from denim-clad rockers to smooth radio stars. But there was tension underneath the beautiful songs and million-dollar smashes. Silent stares, unspoken anger, and a band falling apart because it was trying to change too much. Michael McDonald didn't talk about what truly happened when he joined the Doobies for a long time. Now at 72, he's finally speaking up. Why did his entrance change the band's identity, and who paid the price? Let's find out. Before the Grammys, the stadium tours, and the unmistakable voice that defined a generation, Michael McDonald was just another session musician working hard in the shadows of other people's spotlights. He was born in St. Louis. He got his start playing at local shows before moving to Los Angeles in the early 1970s. There, he became a popular backup singer and keyboardist, and Steely Dan soon took notice of him. McDonald learned how to be precise, disciplined, and nuanced while on tour with Steely Dan. But it didn't make him famous. That happened in 1975 when fate and a health crisis got in the way. Tom Johnston, the lead singer of the Doobie Brothers, had to stop touring because he had a bleeding ulcer. The band required a new member right away. McDonald came in to assist finish the shows. It was just for a short time at beginning, but McDonald's soulful, gospel-tinged voice, which was nothing like the band's previous frontman, transformed everything. The crowds, the radio, and the label all responded. The label, seeing a new kind of success, pushed it. All of a sudden, the support vocalist began creating lead songs. Not only were songs like Taking It to the Streets and Minute by Minute smashes, there were huge changes. The band was changing, but not everyone wanted to change. The Doobie Brothers were falling apart, and all of the problems were Michael's fault. Tom Johnston was more than just the main singer of the Doobie Brothers. He was the heart and soul of them. A founding member with a voice that sounded like growly blues rock and a stage presence that could fill arenas. He wrote their first big singles. Long Train Running and China Grove were two songs I heard. This was his group. In 1975, though, everything changed. Medora and Johnston fell to the ground from weariness and internal bleeding. They took him to the hospital right away. The diagnosis was bad. Stress and constant touring made ulcers worse. The Doobies had things to do. Places booked, tickets sold. They needed someone to fill in, and quickly. Michael McDonald came in. At first, the change appeared polite, like a temporary replacement. But when Johnston came back, he saw that the band had altered. McDonald's songs were starting to get popular. His voice was in charge of the demos for the following album, and the label was pushing them to make it more soulful. People were making choices without him behind closed doors. Johnston was put on the sidelines, not so much because of his health, but because of the momentum. The band he put together was now on a different wave, one he didn't know about. He discreetly left in 1977, saying it was for health reasons. But people who knew the band better knew better. He had been shoved out, maybe kindly but firmly. Michael didn't take over by force. He had done it by making himself indispensable. The Doobie Brothers sounded like a whole new band by 1978. The three-part harmonies and bluesy riffs that used to make them famous were gone. Instead, there were synthesizers, Rhodes, pianos, and Michael McDonald's unmistakable crun. Minute by Minute went platinum many times. The Grammys gave the song What a Fool Believes the award for Song of the Year. The industry cheered. They were loved by radio. But the band was falling apart on the inside. Fans who liked the rough, biker bar sound of early Doobies didn't know what to think of this soft-focused, soul-filled change. Jeff Skunk Baxter and John Hartman, who had been members for a long time, reportedly felt like they didn't fit in musically. McDonald was now in charge of creative decisions. It felt like I was working on my own throughout rehearsals, and there was anger behind the scenes. They weren't just going on tour to play new songs. They were going on tour to support his work. It wasn't personal, yet it couldn't be ignored. Michael's voice has become the brand. Some others dubbed it evolution. Some others termed it giving up. The press called it Yacht Rock, a name that would follow McDonald for years. It wasn't meant to be a nice thing. It suggested smoothness without any real meaning. Rich folks on boats listened to music. Even though McDonald didn't like the word, it remained. The Doobie Brothers were still getting honors. But they were losing themselves. Michael now owned the band, and none of them had signed up for that. The Doobie Brothers changed into the Michael McDonald period, but something more subtle and lasting was also changing the band. Contracts, new contracts, changes to old contracts, royalty payments, and publishing rights. In the music business, where lawsuits may readily replace loyalty, the fine print typically speaks the truth. When McDonald joined, he was employed as a stand-in, tour support, and session aide. But as his songs started to do well on the charts, the label and management anticipated a bright future for him, one that would make them a lot of money. His role changed, and so did his power under the contract. He started getting co-writing credits, then producing influence, and finally full control over songwriting. Founding members, on the other hand, saw their shares lose value. Insiders say that elder Doobie started to notice problems with publishing checks. Their names started to vanish from the liner notes, while McDonald's name kept coming up. And once you lose credit for writing songs, you lose control over direction, royalties, and eventually your identity. Some people said that McDonald deserved every credit. He wrote the songs that became popular. He saved the band from going under. But some people thought it was a takeover that was veiled beneath legal terminology. A band that was based on brothers was now controlled by contracts, lawyers, and pressure from their record label. They never fought in public, but the quiet spoke volumes. The ink was dried. The power had too. In the studio, everyone was polite, professional, and even kind. But there was a schism beneath the harmonies and perfect production. Two different ideas for one band. McDonald's style was inward-looking. He stacked rich chord progressions that tended toward sadness and tried to be perfect. Each note had to be perfect. It was more about sculpting than jamming. The sound went from being shared to being chosen. Band members who used to play together in real time suddenly had to wait for their parts to be added later. McDonald and producer Ted Templeman often put the pieces together. Older members, especially those who liked the rough live take style, felt left out. The enthusiasm that used to be in early Doobie albums was gone, and in its stead was a cool professionalism. In later interviews, Skunk Baxter intimated that the sessions had lost their spirit. He claimed it was less of a band and more of a project. The sessions for Minute by Minute were the most important part. McDonald wasn't the new guy anymore. He was the center. His attention to detail led to acclaim, but it also made him tired. Some of the band members just didn't show up. Others did their parts and then left, like studio musicians. Everyone knew, but no one stated it out loud. It wasn't the Doobie Brothers anymore. This was Michael McDonald, and the others were in orbit. Backstage in Cincinnati in 1980 on tour, there had been a lot of tension building up for months. Missed rehearsals, quick tempers, and passive-aggressive comments hidden under professionalism. But that night, something broke. There are several versions of the narrative, but they all say the same thing. A fight over the set list evolved into a yelling war. Not between McDonald and an outsider, but between McDonald and John Hartman, the band's first drummer. Hartman said he was making the band a solo act with support singers. McDonald, who's generally quiet, didn't back down. Other members of the band jumped in to calm things down, but it was too late. What had been quiet anger suddenly had a voice. Hartman packed his things that night and didn't come back for the rest of the tour. He didn't get fired formally. He departed right away, like many others would. The tour was over for the band, but things would never be the same again. They still grinned and played the hits on stage, but behind the scenes, loyalty was broken. McDonald didn't want to get into a fight. He wasn't aiming to ruin a legacy. But by being himself and doing what he did best, he had changed the band's DNA. The press never reported on that night in Cincinnati, but for those who were there, it was the beginning of the end. Even Michael McDonald was bored of being Michael McDonald by 1981. The strain to be creative for the band, the underlying conflicts, and the constant grind, it was just too much. Behind the achievement came tiredness. And for McDonald, the job that had made him famous suddenly seemed like a prison. He discreetly walked up to the band and said that maybe it was time for a break. He might be able to take a step back and allow the group find its roots again. But at that time, the business had seized onto his voice like a brand name. The label didn't want to go in a different route. They wanted another Minute by Minute, more ballads, more soft tunes, and more Michael. McDonald had already started trying out solo work in private. He missed being able to work together without having to worry about what everyone else thought or what the Doobie name meant. But he was careful and remained devoted to the band that had given him a chance. Still not sure if he would be welcomed on his own. The other members could feel it. They have seen it before. Artists looking for ways out without saying so. But the irony hurt the most. The man whose presence had almost broken up the band, McDonald, now wanted out. But when he finally left, there was no big fight, no press release conflict, just a quiet goodbye. The sweet voice that had changed the band faded away. Over the next few decades, the Doobie Brothers became a legacy act, getting back together for tours, awards, and TV appearances that were fueled by nostalgia. Michael McDonald would sometimes join them again. His voice was older, but it was still identifiable. It all looked like forgiveness, peace, and fraternity on stage. But there was still quiet between shows. McDonald didn't talk about the past tensions much in interviews. When asked, he politely turned it down. He would reply, "Every band has its ups and downs." But some people weren't as polite. Jeff Baxter and Tom Johnston didn't attack. They gave veiled criticisms and reminders. Johnston once said, "We were a rock band until we weren't." The band traveled and practiced separately when they weren't on stage. Even press appearances were meticulously planned so that they didn't clash. There was no public hatred, but there was also no closeness. Just the dance of professionalism. Fans wanted to think that the story had a happy ending, that past wounds were healed, and that the band had come full circle in its growth. But the truth was more complicated. Some wounds had just formed scabs. Some had never been closed. They played the songs and smiled for the cameras, but there was a kind of rehearsed remoteness behind the harmony. People who used to change each other's lives and subsequently went on are now quiet. Michael McDonald didn't disclose the truth for 50 years. And when he eventually did, it wasn't in a book tour or a headline. It occurred in a quiet podcast interview that came out just a few months after his 72nd birthday. He spoke slowly and thoughtfully, not about blame, but about how sorry he was for not being ready for the job he took on. How he never wanted to be in charge of the Doobie Brothers. He just didn't know how to say no. He stated, "I was filling in, but then I wasn't. I turned into what I thought I was helping to hold together." He said he didn't say anything when others did. That he felt bad about how the band changed around him. That he occasionally wished he had left the band sooner, not because he didn't like them, but because he respected what they had been before him. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't sour. It was a man who was older now, looking back on a life that was influenced by chance, opportunity, and unforeseen consequences. McDonald didn't say he was sorry. He didn't have to. For the first time, he just revealed the truth, and that changed how we recalled everything. He saved the group. He broke up the band. He brought them to the Grammys and took them away from their home. Michael McDonald wasn't born into the Doobie Brothers. And for a lot of people, he never really became one. Not like Tom Johnston was, and not like the first group was. He was from a different time, had a different sound, and was a different person. But maybe that's the point. It was never meant for McDonald to be a hero. He was meant to be a short-term solution. Instead, he became the most well-known member of a band that didn't recognize it was changing until it was too late. And maybe he wasn't a Doobie Brother in the usual way. That's probably why it worked and why it broke. People talked about his voice for years. His time was full of controversy. His legacy is hard to understand. Michael McDonald made the Doobie Brothers into something that people will always remember, whether they loved him or hated him. Not by chance, not by force, but by doing something that no one else could do. Michael McDonald didn't just join the Doobie Brothers. He changed their course for good. His voice made him famous, but it also broke him. And the story behind that change was never as easy as the music made it sound. If the truth shocked you, sign up for more. Legacies that are not known. The past is never over.